don't...
Space. In what you were saying, and like hers is a projected virtual, right? Like from what I understand of the reading.
The one about disinvestment in buildings? Or the projected speed? Oh, no, you're right.
Yeah. Not Marcella Gauss, sorry. Elizabeth Gross.
Yep, Elizabeth Gross.
Reference the article, which is not bad.
But I think the Elizabeth Gross one too was the one that was talking about the man who saw buildings as being flexible and that they're just the shells, and nowadays all you design is the outside, and then things are going to change on the inside because
Well,
that's what the MIT Media Lab, right? They fill their space as the shell gives them their little, like their kind of thorax, and then they just sort of fill it and adjust it and do what they.
But does that become like
do anywhere?
I think you could go both ways, like that, like the book that was in the office, How Buildings Learn, right? Like you have two poles. You have Corbu on one end, where living in a Corbusian villa implies a very specific lifestyle, right? Like you interview people who live in those villas and they say, hey, when we first moved here, we actually have to get rid of a lot of our stuff because it not only wants, it almost, I don't want to say it obligates, because I don't think architecture should obligate you to, but it warrants a very minimal lifestyle. It allows you, it almost allows you to prioritize or understand a hierarchy of what is important to you, what is essential to you when you're living in your
If you're
lifestyle.
in a glass house, you don't have room for hoarders. Like you can't live that
And
life.
then on the other end of the spectrum, you have extremely flexible workspaces, where you have a building shell that at one point could have been a library and now is a theater, now is a workshop, a ballet studio. It could be anything, but then
The culture shed.
the
maybe.
culture, but what, I don't know, I think you can argue either way. I think it depends on who's arguing that, but I don't know, like a part of me feels like if I lean towards something that is so flexible, it's different with what it contains, it somehow loses the ability to capture history in place, like and not just in a way that the building then becomes almost immediately outdated, but a way that it.
But why are you trying to?
Like to me, it's important to experience space through time, but also it's equally important to experience time through space.
Yes.
And so, like, I wonder, like, if a space becomes so flexible that it's almost like it's covering the footprint of where it was, then how do I understand where it will be? Like, how do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that I'm
so
right.
If you live in like
I don't even know that I make sense right now, but I'm just saying
I know
that.
what you mean. It's like if you live in if it becomes a city where all of these spaces, where the framework is designed by an architect, so they're like ascribing some level of meaning to what the shell looks like, right? Depending on if it's just a square or whatever. But if you live within a city in which every space is determined and open by the collective, I mean, I don't think that would happen, right? Because people would start to take ownership and want to like embed themselves within the architecture and not let it be so free. You would have an anti sort of freedom establishment, I guess. But to me, it's like the idea or definition of space doesn't necessarily need to be a physical. It isn't a physical thing, right? Like.
Well, the problem with that is that.
So then it doesn't have to be this like free, open space. I mean, it could be this building, but that it is no longer programmable in this space. Like we're not seeing this as a living room anymore. This is an office, and that. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
I know,
it could still exist in past histories, but it's still.
But I think that what you've just said, like understanding this not as a living room, but as a tennis court, has physical implications. Because the way we experience space is haptic. It's like it's not. I don't know. Like we can't just say that. We can't just declare that the space is no longer a living room and is now a tennis court. Like
there has to be a church to get people to come and remove the god from there.
Deconsecrate the living room.
Yeah.
Yeah, that maybe. Right?
But how is that so? Like, okay, so if I'm gonna like to the Gao reading, it's like she talks about the closet as being two types of spaces, right? Like
I appreciate
it's
that.
a space that allows gay people to feel comfortable in it, but it also allows heterosexual people to feel safe and allow them to have that space. So not only is the closet just a closet being a space in which you confine things, you allow utility items to exist within, or whatever personal items you put there, but also it is a space, these people, that is a figural space. It's representation of like their understandings of themselves, society's understandings of themselves. It's a safe space and it's not a safe space at the same time. It's private and intimate, but it's also not. So it's like, to me, that reading of just one space that is either gendered or non-gendered, embodied, and like, this could be the same, a living room could be the same thing. I mean, it doesn't have as much implications, I don't think, as that.
And she was even
But,
thinking of it
like-
as like kind of a jail, like where you
Yeah.
put people to get rid of them, like
Right.
the closet
Yeah.
is both
Well,
a
it's
safe
it's
place
a prison,
the-
and it's also entirely freeing, right? Because within that prison are
You can
only
do
people
whatever
of
you
your kind, right?
Mhm.
Because people have imprisoned you within that space.
Right.
So I guess, like, I mean, and it's troublesome to go down that road, right? Because she's looking at it from an outsider's perspective, and that, like, she's saying from a philosophical point of view, you should be able to read all of these things into space. But she is given no, like, clear path forward as to how one would actually implement this, right? Like, we know what a closet is because it's been constructed, and then she's, like, arguing for a new understanding of a closet, but then it's like, okay, well, what does that mean for other spaces? Like, how do you understand what the constructed space is and argue for a new...
In that case, the closet was used as a metaphor in philosophy and in psychology because it had an architectural form.
Right, well,
People
it had
were
a
able to adopt
physical...
it
Yeah, right,
as
so
a
then
metaphor.
how do you do the opposite, where it's not being used in another discipline, right? But
Mhm.
it's being used in our discipline, extract it back out, and then push it back in. I don't know how that works.
That was her thought on architecture adopting things from other fields to
Yeah.
give it identity.
Yeah.
Because as an anthropologist, she was saying that, I can't remember the quote. Architecture is the one that, architecture is a discipline trying to continually define itself
Right, whereas other
and
disciplines
redefine
are, like,
itself.
not necessarily, like, the philosophical discipline is trying to, like, rely on it being the top of that, like, sort of knowledge. And in that, they have, like, a way of understanding how to read, write, and see the world as... Whereas the architects are trying to assume that maybe both. But.
Yeah. I read something that was talking about, there are two tangents I want to go on that, but I think maybe the more valuable one would be because architects don't necessarily produce the same thing a lot. They have to find newness in their work, and they have to continually strive to identify themselves as different from others. Someone who makes bolts or makes computer parts, like, they can just make better objective products, but because
Yeah.
architecture is so subjective, it's hard to create the same thing time and time and time again.
Yeah, well, because it encompasses more than one thing, right? Like, it's not trying to do... Well, I mean, some architecture you would think is trying to, like, accomplish a utilitarian, like, functional task, but most of the time that when the aesthetics, like, play a key role, or there's, like, this other worldly sort of attempt, I guess, at the potential of architecture
And it also
then
said
it takes on
because
something else entirely.
what architects serve is unlike what other professions might serve, where the human body isn't changing. It's like you heal a human. There's a
Yeah.
finite list of solutions. You might treat a car with a finite number of solutions because because architects tend to not just serve a person but groups of people and operate
Right.
in this very, like, amorphous service.
Yeah.
You're not just fixing one thing that has a finite number of solutions.
Yeah.
You're constantly having to respond to a changing
Multiple
body.
changings of bodies.
Yeah, the body itself is changing. It'd be like a doctor operating on a mutant that would
right,
be
well, and
constantly
they
changing.
gave that, she gave that example in the text. It was like, but she was relating it back to technology and how technology has the potential to be either embedded within physical human and, like, what makes you human, like, what's the point in which you, and it kind of goes back to that, like, robot thing, but what makes you human, and the fact that you still have, you're comparing it to a body, like a physical body that you know to be human, and that there is a host there that is human, that relates to you, still allows you to produce architecture that's embodied in some way.
Yes, because
Still-
it starts with the body.
It still starts,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, and architecture sprang from the
Yeah.
human form. Yeah, true. Separate discussion from our human rights and buildings is rights. But still, the idea that like although architecture might now have more of like a social implication, it started out as shelter
Yeah.
for one person. Like you got to believe that the home was the beginning.
Right, yeah. That space was defined by the body, and
Yeah.
therefore the space can never be disembodied, but how do you allow the space to be embodied in new ways, I guess, or attempt to take on more types of, like, it's about systems and types at the end of the play.
Families,
Redefining, no, but like redefining what systems and types that you are trying to identify within here.
True. Yeah, maybe in the case for architecture, what systems are you trying to go for? Is the system changing? Like, is it allowing for future change?
Yeah.
Or is it one that roots itself in, like, its solidness because it knows that the solidness is its identity?
Yeah, well, yeah.
And that'd be my reading of it. And maybe it's possible to create a system that would be able to change and be
Well,
solid
that's
at the
kind
same
of like,
time.
okay, so then another tangent is the Bryony Roberts thing that I sent, the architecture, how is architecture political? So at the end of that, she talks about how Sarah Whiting is kind of the loosest of the four theorists around. I mean, Sarah is a practicing architect, so she's seeing it through the lens of a practicing architect and a like practicing theorist, which is kind of complicated, and then also being in school, so I don't really know what.
I don't know how that works. That's, yeah.
But she was
Both.
saying the same kind of thing, is that we like have to set ourselves up for a sort of architecture that allows for a changing system and redefines types and isn't just about like what the other two were trying to define, which is like how do you address public interiority, like how a public amphitheater was a way of like talking about political sphere, and then now it's moved to the home. Like there's these like paradigms that those two are trying to define, where she's just trying to understand a shifting system or a shifting type and allow it to be that loose.
Do you think, and does that come back to it all, how this might be, Jose, your thought on the social identity? Like how people, because of their shared values, choose to represent themselves in different ways. Like a theater in one culture, not going to be the same as a theater in another culture.
Well, and it's like the same thing we were talking about the other day too, is like how the most mundane things can be seen as a political gesture, right? It's like you choose to wear these socks.
The clothing. I didn't
right,
really
like,
get that.
But
Was she saying, was that something that you heard, or was that what you wear?
I think that was in one of the things.
It was referenced.
But
as
that like the political, it might have been the Bryony Roberts thing, but that it can be taken down to the smallest. Like it is like you choose to brand identify, right? So
Yeah, for sure.
that's a political motive, whether or not you're aware of it, right? And that is filtered through other motives that are either political or economic, and like
yeah.
whether or not you're you know who the larger umbrella of the people that like are owning the companies you're buying from, but you can either be cognizant of it and only buy from companies in which you know what they represent, their political motives, and who they're giving money to, or you're not, and you're just wearing what you aesthetically choose.
True, and some people might do it not even caring, or might know and consciously go against what they
Right,
believe.
yeah.
Those people, that's such an interesting thing to me. Like if I knew that I was buying something that was produced by someone who I disagreed with, but I really liked it,
Yeah.
would I still get it? Probably. That's like buying an iPhone. If you know that
Yeah.
it's bad for the people who make it, you buy it anyway because it's a good
Yeah,
product.
like I'm sure some people were either really put off or not by Apple refusing to give the data from the shooting to the
Yeah.
FBI, and some people probably thought of that as something that they would continue to reinvest in the company and make a political choice to do that or not. You know, like so.
That's a good example.
You're making by having an iPhone, one way or the other.
You have a political
to some
statement.
people, you're making a political
Yes.
statement. You may not read into it as a political statement, but you have aligned yourself in some way with it.
True. Yeah. True.
That's like taking it too far, but
Yeah, I could see how everything has a political dimension.
you could, yes.
And probably, but the thing about that's tricky too is you don't know what you're going to be saying to someone by having it. Like I've thought this before.
Right, yeah, like it's like, do you walk into a room of people that are entirely
Yeah.
like crazy Republicans and you just look like, oh.
But I've had this thought before because I have a Cleveland Indians hat, and it's my favorite hat because I pitched and wore it all the time. Super sweaty. It's my favorite hat. But I've worn it out before, and because of internet friends being like, "Oh, the Indian, it's a symbol of oppression," I'm like,
like the Redskins,
I feel
the whole
uncomfortable wearing my
argument
hat.
about-
It's like I would have not ever felt uncomfortable wearing it in
Yeah.
Ohio, but
Yeah.
because I know that some people might find it offensive,
Yeah.
I will not wear this hat
Right.
unless I feel like it'll be not hurting anyone. Does that seem strange?
No,
Like it's
because
my
I
favorite
thought the
hat.
same thing about my New Hampshire hat. Like,
Yeah.
what do people think about me when I wear my New Hampshire hat? Then I just got over it and I was like, okay, I'm gonna wear the hat. But
Yeah, it's just like a weird thing that if I didn't care so much, I would enjoy life better sometimes.
Well, isn't that's just those are the invisible forces that mold social identity, right? It's not really about the individual as much as it is by the collective, because it's how you define yourself within that area. It's not how you define yourself to yourself.
I wish I could though. I wish I didn't need to think about all the people
No,
who
but
hate
you
the
don't,
Cleveland
no,
but
Indians.
it's
you
true because
could.
you're not defined. You never. The way you see yourself, right, is through other people.
Yeah.
Generally. So the
Yeah.
way that you understand your relationship to yourself and other people is through their reflection.
Yeah.
Unless you're just really hyper attuned, which I am not.
I mean, you could argue, and you made this argument before, which is that even if you had to choose your daily costume, so to speak,
Like
even
Miller.
even if you made your decision
Costume.
of what
True.
shoes to wear, what socks to wear, what pants to wear, what shirt to wear, based on what you like, you could also argue that you like that for that same reason, because you know that it's had a positive reaction,
Yeah.
or that people react with indifference, so you
Yes.
feel comfortable.
Yes, that's like the Obama wearing the same suit all the time, because it removes one decision from his day, makes his life easier, and when he's recorded on TV, it makes it look like it's all the same Obama.
A lot of people do that.
Right,
Yeah.
but then wouldn't you think to some people that's making, you could argue on the flip side of that that's making a political or economical statement, right? It's like, I'm not going to over-invest in my clothing, I'm going to pare back, to not, like buy 1,000 suits, to not
Yeah.
have it be this crazy
For
Armani
sure.
suit, to
It's
just
like-
buy one.
it's
So it
I like
depends
that.
on how the
I like that a
one
lot.
person
Mhm.
is like viewing, or it depends on how
You could do
how a
both of
certain
those the
set of
same way.
framework has been set up to like categorize people, couple people, group people in a way.
Well, yeah, it's like Mark Zuckerberg wearing jeans and a purple shirt every day.
Right.
Yep.
And you can infer, okay, so he is relaxed, he's a Democrat, he is da da da. I don't actually know if he's a Democrat or not.
I mean,
I feel like
But
he
he's trying to say like, I wear a hoodie, I identify with this culture. Like there's
Yeah.
some reason that,
and it could also be very like.
Or it's just
like,
comfortable.
so at some point I trailed off or I zoned out because the previous discussion made me think about the church brew works in Pittsburgh.
oh
So
yeah,
like
deconsecrating. Right.
yeah, exactly. It's like, and this they did it to the degree where so do you know what the church brew works is? It's like
I've heard of it, but I've never been. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so you really need to go to this because
It's in
many
Pittsburgh, right?
they have really
It's in
good
Pittsburgh.
pizza. Yeah, and beer too. Yeah,
Is
so
this a place where like there's like
The-
multiple things set up inside of it?
well the church.
No, you sent me a link to this. I know what it looks like.
Yeah, so like the church is like this. I'm gonna go out on a limb because
Where is it?
the only times I've ever been there, I may or may not have been slightly inebriated, so I can't really recall an accurate memory of what the space looks like, at least with some level of detail. But it's basically this like neoclassical church, like somewhere in the let's just call it early 1900s, right? And so you walk in, and the first thing that you see, which is the first thing that you would see in any church, is what? The altar, right?
Oh, at the far side. Yeah.
And they've populated it with the filtration systems that are used to make beer. So you immediately know what this space is about, right? And of course, the pews are out, so it's been reprogrammed to have an area where it's kind of bar seating and people have drinks and some food and then booths and chairs and tables. So there's no denial in how this space is programmed. Like, you know exactly what it is and what it's used for immediately upon walking through those doors. And yet the shell has a completely different story. And so like, for me it's almost like it anchors building. I don't know if you can call it architecture, but it anchors the building to a very specific date, or at least to a very specific time period. It basically tells me that no matter what that space is used for, I still know what this space was meant to be used for. And for some reason, I thought of that conversation that Kipnis has with Paul about structure and how, from a financial standpoint, structure is one of the most expensive items in the building. And so it warrants exploration, like it warrants a much more dedicated approach. It's something that sometimes people forget about, architects forget about, and use structure as a way of post-rationalizing form. So like I think of the Church Brew Works, and I think, man, for the amount of money that we spend on structure and envelope, just those two things, it almost makes me want to think that the relationship that arises between a space and those two things becomes what affords or what justifies the punch list, which is spending that amount of investment and effort on those two things. So as a consequence, what happens when you can no longer understand that relationship because the space has been reprogrammed to something else? Does that make sense? I'm trying to figure out what it is that I'm trying to say, and what it is that I'm thinking at the moment. But like,
when you put the brew, like the filtration devices, in the place of the altar, you're operating within the building's original organization. Like, you're still playing into how it was originally intended to be seen as there's your icon, there's your altar, whatever.
right.
Like, you have to operate within that structure because you haven't changed the fundamental aspect of how the space has been laid out.
But only because they choose to do that
True.
can we understand that there is a reference to that original space, right?
True.
To that original intent. But I'm saying that if you took a space like this living room and you programmed it, like, I guess my question is, is there something that is lost in that reprogramming? Like, is there a relationship, like a very meaningful relationship between space and form that originally afforded that effort, afforded
Yeah, I see what
that
you're saying.
investment, that is lost and somehow not necessarily voids the building or voids the architecture, but I don't know, I guess that's my problem with flexible space. Like,
If it gets too flexible, whatever the original intent was is just muddled after every reprogramming. Bless you. Like when you move everything around, so flexibly, the intent doesn't become about the original organization, but the intent becomes about flexibility.
I guess I'm
But do you lose it?
I'm still trying to communicate this. I'm still
Yeah.
trying to understand this, but
Yeah.
I wonder if the value of architecture is in the ability to create a relationship between what is being contained, how it's being contained, and from what it's being contained. And so my question then is there some meaning that is lost, or can that meaning be reassigned or redefined once that space tackles a new function or tries to acquire a completely different function? Like, how do you create that relationship to what is there? And again, like Church Brew Works, they do that because they understand how churches are organized, programmatically, how structure follows that.
Yeah.
But couldn't you say space though is also like there are other markers that are indicative of that? So like the first thing I thought of when you're saying that is like, okay, what other spaces do I know of that used to be something else that are completely reprogrammed, but there still is a latent like understanding of what it was. Okay, our office one was a mechanics garage. The lights are like there are things there that are not structural that tie you back to it being something that reminds you of something else. But also like a bigger thing for me is like and this may be because I in the Life of Users manual, that book I was telling you about, that like kind of walks you through a section of a building that was demolished, and then there's the cover photo of like the inside filled void of a space. So it's essentially they like
Poured concrete
into a
building.
house and then took the house apart, and
Yeah.
there's this like imprinted interior in this like form and mass. So you still understand what the existing shape or shell was. You understand that those spaces exist, but no longer do they exist because they're a mass and it doesn't have an interior anymore. The same thing goes for like if a building is demolished and on the outside you see like where the stair was, where the paint on the wall. Like in our office, you can still see that, right? So it's indicative of a three-dimensional space. You knew that was a stair. You can project in your mind that there was a stair and there was an upstairs and a downstairs, and you can start to piece together that sort of shape. The same thing happens when you walk past an old building and the tile is still from where the bathroom is. You can sense the space based on this kind of trace that was left behind. So I don't think it needs to be so
But okay. Sorry.
indicative of what the space was previously. That there will always be markers of what these things were, because it happens over time, right? Like people inherit houses, and there's still I think a memory of the people that once lived there, whether or not they're there present at all. There are still spatial markers or things.
But does that happen because the original intent of that space or that structure was to not be flexible, right? Like that indexing on the wall, on a
Right,
brick
but it
wall,
became
where the
flexible.
stairs was and where the floor was, where the floor met the wall, is only there because that was never meant to be removed, and that wall was never meant to exist in absence of it.
Right, but then
But if you
another
make
shell
something
came
that's
next to
extremely-
it.
Right, but if you
and
make
made
something
a-
that's extremely flexible, so in this specific example, a floor and a series of interior pieces that could be seamlessly removed from its structure, from its form,
Mm-hmm.
without leaving a trace, where is that memory?
Oh, if it's been designed to be removed.
Exactly.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's the difference.
That could be
right?
like, maybe a good example of that, you could think like the new Qatar stadiums, where they're designing these huge FIFA stadiums to be built in Qatar so that they can take them apart and move them somewhere else. As if they would never even be there, because it's ridiculous to build 6 stadiums for this little island. But the idea would be, right? I mean, it's ridiculous.
It is.
I
So
know,
they're
but
like-
ridiculous, and also too that the stadium is the effort and the life spent making these
Yeah.
stadiums to then have them be removed.
Yes,
it's hilarious.
but then they're gonna move them to South America
Yeah.
and Asia. But in that case,
it
it
should
works
just be something
because
that's
the
mobile, so that every time FIFA is having something, they just
like a
move
giant blimp
everyone,
stadium that they
yeah.
could just move. Yeah, I agree. So something like that, it would be cool if the way that was designed told the story of every removal, not in the way of
Yeah.
how a bomb plane, when they
But
shoot
it'd
down a
be-
tank,
but-
has a little
but-
strike mark on the thing for every person that they killed building the building. But I
Yeah.
mean something that at least leaves a trace of its changes
But then
if
but
it's been
then
designed to change.
I hate to always.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't want to dim down that narrative with something that's more pragmatic. But so, then there's the question of at what cost, and are the means of expressing that flexibility and that removability, that what are the inherent costs of that movement, of that fluctuation, of that change, right? So one of the buildings in Carnegie Mellon is the Intelligent Workplace, designed by Peter Boland, and it sits on one of the academic halls. It sits on the roof of
That's the
Morrison
one with
Hall.
the roof. Yeah,
I used to work
that's a
there.
Peter Boland
Yeah,
building.
I
Really?
used to work there because it was that's the Center for Building Diagnostics
Mhm.
and something else, I forget. But the purpose of that building was that nothing is welded, everything is bolted, and it's a building that's perfectly removable from its current setting, and you could easily just place it somewhere else. I'm assuming that within certain parameters. But then ask me if that building has ever moved. And then ask me why not. And the answer is simple, because it would never, that message is not one that is necessarily warranted within very pragmatic rules, which is reality. I mean, you could argue that under very extreme circumstances it would, right? Because you could, like maybe Margaret Morrison was already predestined to be removed or like demolished at some point, and so that building, like that Peter Bowling building, is placed there strategically because he knows that 10 years from now the school is due to demolish it, and so his building is somehow going to finally manifest its destiny by being removed and replaced somewhere else. But that's not the case, right? And so to anyone who experiences that building on a day-to-day basis, or even within the past however many years since it's been built, it's just the building. Like that message never really carried through, and I think that there's a, like, I don't know, it's one of those times where the concept and the argument are extremely valuable in my mind, but I question whether or not their manifestation in reality is, like, if it never happens, why spend all that effort in designing this perfectly flexible space if that never happens? Like, is there, I don't know. And then even if you moved it, unless you were there for the transition, like, could you tell?
That would be the next question I was going to ask.
And
yeah.
The answer is probably not. Why? Because it was made to be perfectly flexible.
Yeah.
So going back, like, is there a memory that is somehow embedded in the building by having it react to a very specific set of parameters? And then if it is to undergo through an adaptive reuse phase at some point in time, only because it was specifically reacting to those parameters will it kind of bring that memory forward. Yeah. Because it's going to require, I don't know, it won't be a seamless moving, a seamless deconstruction. It's painful. It leaves scars.
Mm-hmm. Why does it have to do that though?
Why
is that important?
I don't know. I have no idea. That's the question, right? Like, yeah. Is it important?
I think that would be something where when they were originally designing it, maybe if like the owner wanted it for every time that it moved, there was some trace that it had moved. Maybe there'd be some way that as you move it, it leaves some vestige of the move. If you want that to be important, but if not, if you want it to sort of just be like this ambiguous, like, this has always been here, for someone who's only been there for a year, they're like, it's always been here, but really it's been 10 places. Yeah. And if that's their intent, maybe
like, I'm not arguing against that notion. I'm arguing against its implementation in reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I guess the other question is, like, are spaces, or, I mean, it's also a scale factor, right? Like, a whole high-rise is not going to get up and move. But you can design a high-rise is now designed to be flexible, right? The entire interior is subject to change based on tenants. So
right.
Buildings are already being designed like that, but that doesn't take away from its buildingness.
But wouldn't you say that they're designed to be flexible within a certain like, it's not perfectly flexible. Like, we're talking about, like, you can't compare our office. That underwent a huge programmatic change. Mm-hmm. But you're not going to tell me that a skyscraper is going to become an amusement park. It's not going to be.
But it could.
I'm sure it could, but
depending on what an amusement park is, like what that gets redefined as. Couldn't an amusement park now, the shifting idea of an amusement park, be a place that is an abandoned space in which people can play video game, like an amusement park, like the idea of what an amusement park could just as easily only require a shell that is flexible.
Maybe like Sleep No More, where they just take like an old warehouse and turn it into a theater, where you walking through the warehouse are the theater actor.
I'm just saying,
yeah,
does that exercise then become extremely repetitive?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying this is a good thing.
Every time that happens, it's like, oh, yep, that's another adaptive reuse project where they took something that used to be something else and turned it into something it wasn't.
Yeah.
right? And it's like extremely reductive of the effort that went into the original design and thought of what that building was and how it was to operate.
Yep.
And I'm just saying that if we can so quickly undermine all of that, then why practice?
No, I mean, I'm not arguing for that undermining. It's a question that was posed in the article that I found. Like,
yeah.
she, and this was in 2001, so I was talking to you earlier about this, it's like, she's arguing for this, like, Deleuzian model, and then now we've kind of, 15
She's like,
years later.
It's still in its early
Yeah,
stages.
it's like we can now examine that article as like a kind of not laughing matter, but it was reduced to exactly what she had thought it was, and in a quicker manner than Derrida probably was being reduced.
According to her.
Yeah, but like I just find it interesting. Like she so confidently asserts that this new flexibility or this like new understanding of what space is and how it can be embodied is somehow, and she doesn't know, right? Like they ask her to pin down what that kind of architecture looks like, and she's like, no, I leave that up to the architect, which I think is a huge flaw in why Deleuze was carried through and not done well, is because there was no way of trying to understand or extrapolate what the hell he was talking about.
There was too much room for misreading.
Yeah. A lot of
Not that
interpretation.
I don't think that that's a bad thing, but it was like, it was almost read too closely, right? It was like, she argues that he should have been used as more of an activist rather than a theorist, whereas Derrida was used correctly in the sense that
Just
he
a
was being
theorist.
used
Right.
as just a theorist, whereas Deleuze should have been like a call to action, and then he was read too closely. And I think maybe in that close reading is where you got things that became like tropes of his too quickly, maybe. So
It's sort of like when this could be the professor trying to follow their rules so exactly that you end up
Yeah.
being the professor.
yeah,
Like, it maybe if a theorist has like an idea but they're outside of architecture, they're writing about this notion of interchangeability or adaptation, and architects follow it too closely, they lose architecture.
right, exactly, which is what you're arguing. It's like, so that's why I was asking is like, how do you do it in a way where you don't lose it, or is she just arguing for something that's like kind of already exists within certain typologies and is okay to exist in a realm that isn't necessarily architecture but in interiors, and that's enough. Like it's more about the flexibility of what the defined program is and less about the actual architecture. Like, does it become that? And maybe that's what she was arguing for, and less about actual physical architecture. I don't know. It was just, she was so one side, like, she was very feminist in that.
And like the gay spaces, I thought it was kind of cool.
That
I mean,
when I
that's
first
something I
read
know
that,
nothing
like,
about. I have no
a
idea.
year or two ago, I was like,
Should've
oh,
had
this
Jim here.
is so cool.
Jim could have been our token
Yeah.
gay guy.
Like, I remember reading that in Central Park. Like,
Yeah.
I have a distinct memory of me on the top of this hill on a log reading, not that piece, but there was a piece in the end where it was like a call to action to female architects that, like, if only females could read Deleuze, then it would somehow, like, through their, like, gendered reading of it, would be, like, create a different kind of architecture. And I remember turning to Eric and being like, haha, see, like, I remember, like, having, like, such a terrible response to it. And him just, like, walking down the hill because he was like, this is ridiculous, I can't believe you're, but yeah, it was, like, so, it was very funny.
It's funny.
To think that, like, maybe she's right, like, there's been other people that have argued that, like, architecture it's too much of a phallic, like, field. I don't find that. I mean, maybe I should find that. But, or that, like, if a female's reading of certain topics would allow for a different kind of architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Or create new types of spaces in architecture that, because it's been, like, such a male-centric, which maybe this is true, like, design process, that these spaces inherently give off a male vibe, not vibe, but do you know what I mean? Like,
I think
not like, oh, this looks like a man cave, but, like, because most, like, you have Zaha, you have
penis.
you have
Yeah,
you, like,
seriously,
have
though.
Zaha, you have Jeannie Gang, you have those types of architecture are different than the classically seen male architect, right? Like, I mean, that's a generalization. It's a generalization, but do you know what I'm saying? Where, like,
I know what you're saying.
there is,
I mean,
so
There's-
to me it's kind of interesting, like, then, or you see firms that, like, women are embedded within as, like, the practicing partner, and it's
what did you couldn't you argue that perhaps it's different because they are aware of that, so it's a reaction to what is already there and not necessarily like
its own thing,
it's,
yeah.
it's not
Possibly.
it's not somehow that the building is the genesis to female architecture, but that it's the genesis to an architecture that reacts to their understanding of what phallic architecture is, right?
Possibly.
Right, like I wonder when it becomes.
Like, are we creating this dilemma for ourselves?
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
I'm
But a feminist would argue that, like, yes, we should be aware of what we're
we
reacting
should be,
to,
absolutely.
and react to it with a gendered response, not a neutral response.
Oh, but
And not an
but
anti-
How is that? I don't know.
But I don't,
Yeah,
don't,
no,
I'm
so,
not
like,
the
I-
head for this. But that would have been like like a hardcore, like, first generation
just-
feminist would have
right.
said that. Like, now the feminist would have been like, oh, well, I'm approaching it from already having these assumed rights, and my take on it is from that vantage point, from the second generation, which I'm not fighting back against the male-centric architect, but I am now comfortably, like, but it's different because architecture, I think, is like a little behind in that sense, where like
It is.
the percentage of women at a higher ranking is still like steadily climbing, and especially for certain demographics. So I think they're still in first generation female feminist architecture.
I even think of just like the rate that architecture changes is so slow
Yeah.
that the people who were making decisions when they were our age were aware of the problems when they were our age, but someone now might be operating in a different framework.
Yeah, I think it
Like
depends on
an example I'm thinking of is the that arts building at Drexel, their architecture building that used to be like a warehouse, and then they put in this staircase, and girls will say like when they walk up it that you can like see through the stair and you can see up the stair.
Oh,
But they were saying like if someone had been involved in that design process, who would have thought, oh, you can see up through our skirts? Like, not
Yeah.
that that's a thing, but I'm just saying like it does matter who's involved in the design, and you
Yeah.
kind of have to have lived it. Like if you want to design a great museum, you have to appreciate museums. If you want to design a great
Yeah.
restaurant, you have to appreciate restaurants. Like,
Well, you have to understand the community in which you're trying to serve,
You
right?
would
Or
also
like the
You would also, I mean, I would ask why women are still wearing skirts.
yeah, no, that's what I was actually thinking. It's like, wait, is that actually true
I
anymore?
just don't like. I don't know.
right. Is that's it? Like,
Yeah.
why does that have to be the
Why
consideration?
Why does
Yeah.
the
True.
like? Why does
Mhm.
the neutral response somehow play subordinate to the feminist response? I mean, I'm
Good
I don't
question.
know.
Yeah. I'm getting a drink.
I just, for some reason, I'm inclined to believe that a neutral response is somehow far more intellectual than.
Well,
a
it is, but
feminist
maybe
response.
that's because you're
And
sitting
I wonder if in
now.
doing so, women would actually assert some sort of intellectual superiority.
Right, but we had to get to a neutral response, right? Like, I didn't get to where I am because they had a neutral response to everything. Right? Is that there was a level of women that didn't have a neutral response that allow me to sit comfortably where I am.
Right, but
So now, yes, I can take on
Now
a
you
neutral
can.
stance,
Okay,
and
I
you
see.
can exist in a world in which women can take on a neutral stance, and it becomes something in which. But I don't think I'm very neutral on things generally. So like I can't. I mean, neutral in the sense that like I'm not overly feminist, but I am aware of when things cross a line, but I'm not trying to neutral in that I'm not trying to create a space that is inherently gendered in my gender, but just a space that may reflect the gender by consequence of me being a female. You know what I mean? Like I'm not
yeah.
searching for it to be that. And I don't know necessarily if men were searching for it to be inherently male. It just was.
There's a great study in
Or
that
it probably
for-
was actually as a way of like repressing the woman and allowing the mistress to slip in a back way and like, you know. No, but I mean seriously, like there's probably ways in which like in churches where like the women were separate, like there is gendered architecture to hide women behind certain and separate them in ways. So I don't know.
what I was gonna say was maybe that's actually probably more interesting because it still happens. I'm sure today. Like
yeah, it happens in the Middle East. It happened like.
Oh, I'm thinking the Mormon temple that was just built. Like.
Oh yeah, well,
totally
their women have to
today.
leave, and then they go in the back. Yeah.
Yep. But what I was thinking
Yeah.
is.
Was the architecture the driver, or was
Oh, the
thing that
practice.
is reflecting the driver?
Yeah, but then that's
Mhm.
a whole question about architecture, right? Like, is the thing that the architecture is reflecting the driver, or is the architecture the driver?
Right, but doesn't this loop back to how we were talking about Gary?
Yeah, it does.
Huh. And what's so interesting about that
But
is
he argues that it is contextual. His architecture is contextual.
it's responding to something.
Yeah, that it's not necessarily contextual in the sense that it looks like
It doesn't
is
fit
its
in.
place, but it is his argument for it, which I guess you have to take and use to argue against it or for it, is that it is in some way contextual, just not in a perfect reading of it. At least Bilbao.
I just wonder if, I think it's going back to what I was saying.
I like that this looped.
Yeah, and going back to
Yeah,
what I was
okay.
saying about how,
Already aware of the looping over there.
well, sure. Going back to what I was saying, that the building loses function. So I wonder if it doesn't lose the function but reappropriates some other function, or if it asks us to use or inhabit it in a different way that is not known to us at the moment, but might become evident after some sort of sociological transformation, right? Like, I wonder if, like maybe if a feminist designed a Mormon temple, if it was completely impractical and unusable by its community because it did exactly the opposite of what people wanted it to do, but in due time, with some gender shift, it would at some point in the future become perfectly usable because now women are allowed to go in through the same entrance as men. Like, I don't know, like.
Or to your point though, like if a feminist designed the Mormon temple and still kept it the same, right? But it was her choice to separate the female, is that different? Does that somehow give them a right that they didn't have because the male designed it as a separation, but because she is separating it, she's allowing for the separation for herself?
I think it comes down to awareness, right? Because that sort of sociological change will only happen through the awareness of the collective, not through the awareness of the architect, right? And so only if that architect can communicate that message to those many women who inhabit that space, in my mind, would that actually be would that be what you're saying, right? Like if she's the only one that knows, if she's the only one that has knowingly made that decision, then how does her knowing that, how does that empowerment transcend her and become allocated to all of the women that are part of Mormon culture?
True.
But, one thing I will say though is the only way that that message, that the kind of ethos of that project, the only way that becomes evident, even in the most minute of ways, is if the space somehow responds to its shell. Like, I think, again, spitballing here, but I wonder if the way to communicate a message of such complexity is not necessarily. I wonder if you lose that message if you created something that was flexible.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think in that case,
And
you
so if
definitely
you
do.
lose that, then again you have to question the intent.
Yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
question. So I don't know. This is me. This is me. I guess innately revolting against flexible space, and I'm not sure if that has to do with how it was taught or or certain influences in my life that have led me to think a certain way, but like I have to believe that that message would become infinitely more powerful and effective if it allows itself to be present. And I wonder if that presence is predicated on its ability to communicate its way through space, not just shell. And
Yeah.
I wonder if you lose that in reprogramming a space to function in a completely different way.
It's so
Like I wonder if you lose that memory, and then what happens? You know, maybe that change undergoes by itself without the influence of architecture, and the space is reprogrammed. But then 50 years from now, we have no memory of
But
it
it
because the
existed.
architecture has forgotten,
Yeah.
and we go back and we circle back to what it used to be.
Yeah.
It is somehow reprogrammed to what it was originally designed to do, except now the message has been lost.
I find it strange that she argues for, and maybe I'm misreading her, but that she argues for a level of flexibility, but then she also talks about how, like, transgendered space and gay space has this thing that's, like, defined, but then because it's so defined as, like, a free space in which people, the space is, like, she says, vibrating with sexuality. Like, the space knows
Right.
what it is, right? Like, it knows that it's projecting its spaceness, right? Like, it's projecting this, like, sexual freedom and awareness of what it is, right? But because it does that, it allows non-gays to come to it, right?
Yes,
To-
when
they
other
want-
people, heterogeneous people, will
Right.
come and try to absorb and take
right,
part in that
because
energy.
they want to be a
Mhm.
part of what the space, not a flexible space, but what the space is projecting that it is, right?
Yeah.
So, like, it's strange to me that she is looking for flexibility in the space. And maybe she just means in the terms of what space is. But then so clearly defines that level of, like, the importance of a projected space and an embodied space by way of these people that are coming in and, like, defining what it is. It's just like it's a funny
That
argument.
you can want flexibility, but
But
only
then
within the
so-
bounds that you've created.
Right, yeah.
So maybe it has to be like you have to create the space with built-in flexibility, beyond which any additional flexibility would cause it to lose its defining trait.
Yeah. And is the flexibility she's talking about in the spaciness of it and not actually the architecture?
No, the architecture doesn't even matter there. 'Cause
Yeah,
it's all about the
that's just-
people.
yeah,
like it's
right.
who's there.
Right, because
and what
then
are they
it's
doing.
like if she's saying that, okay, this is a gay
Mhm.
space in which it's highly sexualized, and people that are not are coming to the space, doesn't their attendance adjust what the space is? Because now it is not just projecting its sexuality and its, like, eroticism, but now it's also taking on these people that don't necessarily ascribe to that as their space type. So it's changing, like,
The architecture doesn't even matter.
yeah,
in that
but the
scenario.
space itself is changing based
Yes.
on their they're being admitted into it in
Right.
some way.
The people make the space in that sense. Like
So
you could be
maybe
in
then
a-
she's
you could
just
be in-
arguing for that. I don't
Maybe.
know.
Yeah, maybe, but that's her rules. That's the rule she's setting up. So if you're saying
She
that
said-
flexibility is what matters, then you have to say that that's your rule.
Yeah.
If we're saying that it's the identity of the structure and the skin and all these other
Yeah.
things, and that's your rules, then you just have to make sure that what your
Yeah.
rules work within that flexibility.
Right. Or the systems that you said.
Mm-hmm.
All goes back to Sarah Whiting and her goddamn systems. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think that systems is interesting because just to think about like the word system, it's almost
It
like
could
saying
apply so
paper,
many things,
or yeah,
yeah.
it's like a blank canvas to say, but you can use it as a
Maybe
tool.
that's why it's easy to say, right? In relationship to
Yeah.
the things she's trying to tackle is like, we're redefining systems. Oh, what does that mean? Like,
The yeah, the thought about the gendered space is a really interesting one because I don't like using the church one because I feel like it has too many cultural and religious connotations. But I feel like the archigram guys who designed a lot of these buildings that were meant to be like these hyper flexible structures, they the ones that were built, the people who were involved with the design and building of their own designs, which were meant to be flexible, did not want them to become landmarks. They did not want them to have any sort of protection because they believed that once you apply any layer of protection to the original intent of flexibility, it will make it impossible for their original intent to come through.
Right.
So their design intent for flexibility went completely at odds with the architecture's rootedness in stability and permanence, which it's like that's probably where this whole challenge comes from, is like architecture is meant to be stable and unchanging.
Yeah.
And once you start to change it so much, it either has to take on new stability and new permanence, or be, from the outset, a cultural shift about how architecture should not be so permanent or flexible. And if it is, in what framework does it find its permanence?
So how do you see this as a person that studied architectural preservation? Like, if that's a question too, of like, what do we preserve, what do we not preserve, and how do things become, like, if we're in a state of preserving too much or not being aware of what we're preserving, like blanketing that we need to do this, is it a call for, like, is that why there would be a call for flexibility because of that, or is it like totally unrelated?
I love the to make the comparison between Corbusier and what was the other one you were saying? Corbusier at the very beginning.
Just a lot of things.
I know, it was like here are the two odds. The flexible workspace, that's what it was. Corbusier and the flexible
Maybe
workspace.
this is why you should record it so we can rewind.
Yeah, well, but I just think that that's something that's really interesting, is because only since modern construction have people really thought that you can design something at the beginning so that it can have a future life.
Yeah.
Everything in preservation, because of American and Western culture, is reactive. And it's really hard to design something thinking this will have a second life unless you know, based on when it's done, that the architect and designer who did it carries with it the certainty that it will be regarded as an important building in 50 years. That's like the only way that you can be sure that something will last. And even then you have like the Folkart Museum, which connected to another museum, you know? So
taken
it's
out by the museum and
Yeah.
other.
okay. So it's all based
Such an
on
interesting.
yeah, it's all based on culture. That's preservation is all based on culture, because most of U.S. preservation thoughts come from either France or England. In French, it was create the best of all possible futures. In England, it was just let it rust. Like the golden stain of time is the one that people will tend to say, anti-scrape, like let things be, English,
Yeah.
romantic,
Mossy.
etc. Yeah. Let time show its presence. That's the thing. And the French way of doing things was whatever's there, we can take it to some future thing which may never have existed, which allows it to be more of itself in its time than it was before, like to adapt as it goes. So those are the two competing thoughts in the U.S. for how we do preservation,
Okay.
which I think is super interesting. That what you
Wait,
see,
those, like
those
the French
two-
and the English model.
that's
those
where
are the
U.S.
competing
came from.
thoughts.
Yeah, those two foundational thoughts. So, but what's interesting about that is that you tend to see buildings built by each of those two cultures as representative of those two thoughts even today. Like think about like Lloyd's of London, the way that
I
that's
love that building.
yeah. So that one is like flexible workspace. The whole idea is that it has its structure
Soft.
that
That was hilarious.
it has its
Yeah.
structure that it's able to allow for change within the inside, and it moves all the systems to the outside, but it allows for it to sort of experience decay. Like there's not a process where you can take it apart and put it back together somewhere else. It would be really hard to recreate that building anywhere else. On the flip side, think something the French model might be Pompidou. Yes,
Ah!
Pompidou.
Oh, you made that was a terrible high five.
But do you see how both of those two thoughts are represented
Yeah.
differently by the same
Yeah.
cultures, even today, where the Pompidou could be broken down and reassembled anywhere. But it's those same two thoughts by those two cultures expressed in their own way today. And then culturally, there are other models, Italy being the most aware of probably Eastern processes of decay and change and adaptation,
Okay.
because the way that, like Carlos Scarpa is a great example, the way that he will incorporate decay into new things, consciously aware that it's a layering process and things tend to stack, and there's like this building and tracing that happens, which I think is beautiful. But
Which
that's
is also
like
super indicative of Venice. And
yes, it's
places
the
of
influence, the
shape, yeah.
culture. It's all based on culture. And then you might have something that Eastern, at least I'm not so familiar with China, but
They tear everything down.
well, yeah, yeah. That's one thing I can't comment on. Is other than right now, I know there's some backlash against change
Yeah.
of removing things that are historical. But I love the wabi-sabi, the Japanese approach of how when something breaks, you don't fix it how it was, but you fix it with gold. to highlight the cracks and show how it changed.
Is that
you know?
why Rems did that entire gold leafed building in Paris?
I think it was to make a comment that building skins are so expensive that it's actually
Oh.
cheaper to hammer. It's actually cheaper to hammer on gold on top of concrete than to do a traditional building skin. But
That's funny. That's
but-
a big fuck you.
yeah, I know. But there, I think because the tradition being something that Eastern culture holds as paramount, they would say that it's not so much the decay of the building that matters, and it's not so much its reuse that matters, but it's the tradition. It's the process of becoming. That's what matters.
Ooh, I like that.
And that's where the temples in Japan, that's the prime example of Eastern preservation culture, built all of wood because they're in a culture that's based geographically on seismic shift. So everything falls down. So the tradition and the cultural acceptance of tradition is paramount over any building, means that this temple is it's supported by like this craftsman brotherhood, and they have two temples side by side. Every 20 years, they take one down and rebuild it using the same techniques. And they look at the other one. Once they've taken one down, they look at the one that's still standing and rebuild the one. And then 20 years later, they tear down the other one and rebuild it looking at the other one. So that this is the 19th that they've done this. So this has been going on for centuries. Because tradition is what's important. It doesn't matter that either of these buildings, neither of them are the same as what they originally were, but they've been built using the same traditions that they were originally built 2,000 years ago. So those,
That's so interesting, and
Yeah.
such an interesting model for like kind of what I was talking about.
yeah, where there it's like the act
Yeah,
of doing
and
something
less
is what
about
matters.
The, actual physical
The building
space.
itself
Yeah.
could change a million times.
Yeah.
And the closest thing we have to that today, and this is what my professor loved to talk about, would be like, say you have your grandpa's axe. It could be something that he used to cut down 1,000 trees. Over the course, maybe he inherited from his grandpa. Maybe the handle broke, so he fixed the handle. Maybe he inherited from his grandpa, he fixed the head.
Yeah.
And so what you have, you could say this is my great-grandfather's axe, but it's changed so many times. It still performs the same function
Yeah.
because of the tradition of using it. Its use is what has that cultural value in that sense. That's the closest thing that we have to the Japanese. Yeah. So those are in my mind the competing notions of cultural preservation, and architecture plays into all those to varying degrees. I think the Italian one is the most interesting
Yeah.
because it's at the east and the west, and it's like it recognizes this layering, but it also tries to do new things. It's
Well,
like
it's also indicative of the Italian way of life and political and economic process. Where
and
it's
it's
just that
cultural.
it's
Totally.
never the shit never gets piled out. It's just piled on.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting.
So, I mean, there's no preservation architecture that is right or wrong. It's all there's no licensing. You just do it. There's not like a board that certifies you as a preservationist. You just do it because there's not like a manifesto. There's no the thought. The time is deep, but the profession is short. It's only been around for like 50 years as a profession in the U.S.
That's
So it's Before that, it was like gentlemen and women's clubs who like maintained historic revolutionary buildings in the U.S.
Daughters of the Revolution.
Exactly. They started this. Well, that'd
They
be
wanted
my
to keep their houses.
thoughts on change, and that's why I find that buildings change over time book to be so interesting because in that one, Stuart Brand's talking about the MIT Building 20, where it was designed so that it was all made of wood, and when you needed to run a wire, you just drill a hole and run a wire through, and the building shows those adaptations through its manipulation. So you see every hole that's ever been drilled, essentially, and you can take out certain parts and put in new parts, but like that's very. I feel like that it captures the essence of the need for change while still maintaining the signs of change. Like it isn't erasing, but it's also not trying too hard to be something new. And that's such a hard balance. You can't design a building to do that. It was just a shed.
Yeah,
Literally, it was
just
designed by
happens,
probably carpenters and engineers. There's no
I
architecture.
wonder if it's if you design it with the intention of that, it just says it will never be that. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
you almost have to design it with that to have none of that as the
Well, no,
future
it-
intention of it.
the axe was designed to cut down, right? To cut down trees. It wasn't designed to capture how it would be retrofitted through time.
Mhm.
But I think it's the mentality of the modification. It's the mentality of adapting it to somehow perpetuate its function. And I think that's what I lean towards, right? The effectiveness of that ideology to capture time through space, time through object,
Mhm.
versus designing something that is meant to change and move, but perhaps never does so. I find the first as acquiring more depth through time. I think.
Mhm.
I was listening to you guys, and I think about Khan post travels to Italy and how he begins to understand the building as a ruin. I mean, he says that in his mind, one must first understand building as a ruin, and so as a reaction, he would design the building or the ruin first as the kind of enclosure, and then allowed the soft interior to be susceptible to change. But that somehow, even if it did change, the ruin would still be there as an indicative of what was like. You know,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like I don't know.
And
That's
then
so
comes the
romantic. That's
discipline
like
of interior
designing
design.
designing the
Designing
ruin.
the ruin, yeah.
I love it, but it's like, who has time to do that?
Yeah.
Like, I'm picturing us for like Race Street or something. We're like, oh yeah, how's this gonna look like 1,000 years from now? And it's just like
It's
a jungle
funny though,
gym.
do you think like Jigsaw does that? Like I would say that like some of their buildings where they like try to cast in old, like I can't remember the one
I don't
specifically,
know.
but like they use like various types of brick, and then there's this like one found piece of
You know, the stone cobbled together and all that.
yeah, it's like,
Mm.
do you think that they think about it like that, where it's like, oh, we're designing this thing that like, if someone came up to it in 100 years, they would think
What
that it
is
wasn't
going
a
on
new
here?
building technology, that potentially it could have been in a different place or of a different time.
In my mind, I see it as like, if the real world is like Revit, they're like, well, we need a wall here. Let's just change the family type from concrete to rubble. Like, I don't think they really thought
No,
about
they're
it.
not?
They just
Okay.
probably found this rubble when they were excavating. They're like,
And they
okay,
were like, oh,
cool.
this is, oh, okay.
That's how
Maybe
I see it.
I think maybe I
Maybe I'm
like,
wrong.
I don't know, they have pretty smart people there. Maybe you would know more, you have your friend that like.
Oh, Chaz the intern.
Yeah, he was.
He's been there
really
3 months.
excited for it. Maybe you should pick his brain and
He
see like.
completely understands Jigsaw.
No, but like, I mean, you can look at their work and then look at the people, which I have a tendency to do, is look at the work, then look at the people where they went to school, and then be like, oh, well, this must be great.
Yeah.
But
Mhm. It's cool to think. How would you do that today? How would you design like that from the future or from the future backwards? How would you design?
Well, I mean,
that's what she
backwards?
says in the thing. Is like
What?
the future is our present. I can't remember. I have to look at it, but Gao, not Gao. Why do I keep calling her
Moof?
Gao? Not Moof. Grows.
Gross.
Elizabeth
Yeah, gross.
I should
That's
remember this because Terry Grows, who I'm obsessed with, we'll never see though actually in the flesh.
She says something about the future, or
She was talking about how the future is something present, an historical present or a historical past. I don't know. It was some sort of looping thing that you sort of just said, but
interesting.
I
not
don't
really
think-
if you
I
can't
don't
understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't think. Well, I wonder if
A
our
virtual past. That's what she said.
But the future is
the
a virtual
future
past.
is a virtual past.
Oh, okay.
I wonder.
Does that mean-
I
Pardon.
wonder if. I wonder. You talk about Race Street, but I wonder if it's. Does it have more to do with project typology and like I wonder if the ruin. I don't think it takes 1,000 years to reveal a ruin.
Like what
I
warrants
think it could
to
take
be a
much
ruin?
less than that. All right, so
It's true.
when Khan talks about the ruin, I don't think he necessarily is talking about the ruin as an ancient Roman temple. I think that it could be interpreted as the ruin as the walls of our office, like that in and of itself could be a ruin.
Oh, true.
But 50 years, it's a 50-year-old ruin, so to speak. So ruin as in, ruin as the kind of concrete paradigm of the architecture. Like ruin as the thing that is perhaps less susceptible to change, but most susceptible to capturing change.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Okay, yeah, it shows the change or it shows the
Like
degradation.
the brick wall that supports our roof is perhaps less susceptible to change because it is structure and it holds up the roof but it is the sole memory, right, of the place they used to be. So it is most susceptible to capturing that change.
Yes.
Like I don't necessarily
Oh,
see it
yeah,
as
I
something that is covered in moss and vegetation. I see it as something that is something that I'm gonna allow some words. Something that contains what it was, something that it wasn't, like thinking of the ruin as a container, thinking of the ruin as shell, its interiors change, and that change is projected outward to that ruin, to that shell, to that envelope. The ruin is still the same, but it is somehow telling the story of how that building came to be and what it once was. And that doesn't necessarily have to operate within a time frame past 50 years. But I don't know.
So you
Does
could
that
say
have to, like,
you could say in a way that like a doormat is like a ruin then, or some element that captures.
Yeah, I don't think that it's, I don't think it necessarily operates within the scale, I mean, as well, in a similar scale of the Pantheon or the Parthenon or any of those. It could be much smaller, it could be part of the nuance of the architecture, right?
Yes.
Like
Who does the determining of what makes it a ruin?
the determining of what makes it a ruin. I wonder if you could objectively classify the ruin as something that is juxtaposed to something else, some softer architecture that is more susceptible to change, or to be removed, or to be decayed. Something that is not as, I don't want to say perpetual, but not as long-lasting as the ruin,
The anti-ruin.
the anti-ruin,
The anti-ruin.
anti-ruin.
You can think of like bones. You change your skin, you change your hair. It's like the
Exactly.
thing that
yeah.
remains. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to, I mean, it could happen within the second, right?
Yeah, I guess the duration of the ruin doesn't matter.
It doesn't,
long
I
as
don't
there's,
think it
like, a
does.
ruiny
I think,
Part within the ruin.
as long as there's an understanding, as long as there's an acknowledgement, as long as there's an ability for you to understand that relationship, I think that's all that matters. I don't think it needs to be, again, 2,000
You
years.
should tell this to people who do the ruin porn.
The ruin porn.
Have you been to Four Freedoms Park at Roosevelt Island? It's the
Is that the
con.
That's the con, but that was built after his death.
Yeah,
right?
it was built like 2 years
It's
ago.
Beautiful.
Uh-huh. But right behind it is a stabilized ruin that they purposefully kept. That was the smallpox hospital, because it told the story about the island, how the island used to be a place where people went when they were sick.
So for it to be a ruin, does it have to tell a story?
I don't know. I think it has to have borne witness to some story, whether or not you can understand it.
Yeah.
Like hieroglyphics were ruins,
Like a
we didn't
dolomite.
understand them.
Like a dolomite.
Dolomite?
Those are like it's kind of like Stonehenge. Those are called dolomites. Those like things that rest on
That's a good
other
one.
things.
Yeah. You could even probably say there's like digital ruins, like computers that you can't read anymore. They're
Or
still,
there's digital ruins within the internet, probably.
yeah, things that we can't read anymore, but they're still
Virtual
there.
ruins. Oh.
Virtual ruins, the Matrix, yeah.
I'll have to read or watch that. Read it. Are there books?
Yeah, we are.
What is
I have the movies here.
The Matrix?
Yeah.
The
Are there
Matrix is a book?
books?
I'm
There's a
pretty
book?
sure
A
it's
comic book or a book?
I didn't know that. I don't know.
There's comic books too, that Animatrix.
Yeah, I know
You've
that
been
one.
recording this whole time.
Yeah, I was recording it.
Oh.